Hi, everyone. Walter McKenzie. Welcome to our fourth panel on transforming education. We have an amazing panel tonight assembled to have an incredible discussion. And that's saying something because each panel has been so wonderful. To have each next panel step in and take it to the next level it does my heart good. There's so many wonderful people working with the Worthy Educator, and the three on the panel tonight are no exception. Let me introduce them to you. Dr. Aundrea Smiley is a career educator with a PhD in higher ed administration and K-12 programs from Liberty University. She works in restorative justice in education, and that's her particular expertise. She's a professor of teacher education at Eastern Mennonite University. Aundrea, welcome.
Thank you, Walter. Glad to be here.
Starr Sackstein is the owner of Mastery Portfolio and the Massachusetts State Coordinator for Educators Rising. Additionally, she works for PDK International as the Career Confidential columnist for Kaplan Magazine. As all of you know, Starr has published extensively, and her specific expertise on authentic assessment practices will come in handy tonight. Starr is a worthy champion in education with the Worthy Educator. Starr, welcome.
Hey, Walter, I'm so happy to be here with the rest of the team.
Amen. And Ryan Bell, the former head of school at the Academy at Bell, providing leadership for a diverse and inclusive learning community that celebrates academic excellence, social emotional development, and cultural competence for students and their families. He currently serves as the Student Services Manager with the Roanoke Higher Education Center. And Ryan is also a worthy education leader. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, Walter, and hey, team. Excited to be here with you guys.
So excited to have you with us. When we frame this work at the beginning, the essential question is, what does education look like in a diverse, decentralized global society that is inclusive, equitable, and open to all people, where each individual adapts, evolves, and contributes by solving problems and creating new value? That's a tall order, and each panel has taken another step in trying to sharpen the focus on what that vision can look like. Our first panel, we started the conversation from ground zero, and by the time we were done at the end of the hour, amplifying student voice carried the day. And they were very clear on that. And if you watch the recording, you'll see there's no doubt that student voice is essential in the work we're undertaking. Our second panel in November, community has to be at the core. Yes, we're the experts, we're the professionals, but we need to bring our community into the school, not just to participate at curriculum nights and back to school events, but to be a part of school decision making so that there's buy-in. And so that when it comes time for everything from approving budgets and tax levies to making critical decisions about how we provide services and meet the needs of all the citizens in our community, we have our community stakeholder support. And then our third panel in January did an amazing job talking about how the work of schools has to be to create the kinds of conditions and cultures that allow kids to know they can do hard and great things. And that really carried the night. And so that's where we land tonight to say, if that is the charge, if that is the vision, if we're going to totally transform schools from where we've been for 100 years in this industrial age model, how do we create those conditions and cultures so that when kids come to school, the learning is theirs, they take charge of it, and they know they're going to do great things? Easy question to lead off with. Panel, what do you think?
Yeah, easy question, I guess. Uh, and as you mentioned it, and as we were talking about it earlier, so a lot of the work that I do is centered around working with families, more specifically parents, right? And a lot of times we talk about the conditions of schools, the conditions of the school district, the conditions of all of these spaces, and to me, the most important part of learning and the most important part of preparing the conditions for students to be successful happens within the hours that they're away from the school building, right? And so I think maybe how I would frame it is, how do we create those conditions within their home atmosphere, regardless of what that looks like, right? Regardless of if it's a two-parent home, regardless if they're living with grandmother, regardless if they have a parent who may be incarcerated, regardless of the community they're coming from, if it's below or above the poverty level, whatever their situation is, right? If they're even coming from a family with parents who are very well off, but they don't see them very much. They're not heavily involved in the education of that child, right? They have a nanny who's raising the child, or whatever the case may be. What does it look like for us to create that at home, right? So that everything that that you do at the school isn't undone the moment they leave the school building. So I don't know if there's an answer to the question, but it's sort of where my mind goes with it.
Well, it's a great leadoff. And Ryan, it's no surprise to me because you started a whole movement, Black Father Family, to help fathers get involved in their child's education. So you see the value in this and you understand the importance of getting in there and getting families involved. Would you say anything in addition, now that I've shared that insight with the audience, as to how that factors into this transformation of education?
Yeah, 100%. So one of the impetuses for Black Father Family. So I spent some time as a special education teacher,
Yeah.
and one of the things I noticed is, we were going into these special education meetings for the IEP meetings, and the parents were coming in the meeting, and they couldn't really advocate for their student. They had no idea what we were talking about in that meeting, right? Even if we were sending the forms home ahead of time for them to look at, when they got there, they had no idea what we were talking about, right? And I don't know what the reason is. It could be, a plethora of various reasons as to why they were not as prepared when they walked in there. And as this was my first real job was as a special education teacher. So I was young too, fresh out of college. And as a young special education teacher, I didn't have a clue either on was I doing the right thing by the kid necessarily, or was I doing the right thing by the family, and the family, and more specifically, the father in that circumstance, um, didn't have the tools they needed to advocate. And one thing I noticed, I don't care how involved or uninvolved a man is, if he walks in that building, the kids treated different.
Yeah.
It just is what it is, right? If there is some male figure attached to that student or to that family, the way that that student is treated, or the way that that family is dealt with, it's just a different thing. And so we begin to try to start preparing these dads around these meetings, right? Here's
Yes.
what an IEP is. Here's what a 504 plan is. Here's what IDA even means. Here's what these particular types of labels and services are. If they getting in special education isn't necessarily hard.
Right.
Getting out of it is a very good, very difficult thing to do, right?
Yeah.
And so just making sure that they were prepared again. So if they're prepared on the front end before they walk into that meeting, then they have the ability to assist the schools in creating those conditions for everybody to be successful and for everybody to thrive, right? And I would
Right.
tell people all the time, I tell teachers and principals, you want that, because at
Of
home,
course.
this was going to happen. All of those things are going to be enforced. When it comes to discipline, it's going to be enforced at home. Educationally, it's going to be enforced at home. Social and emotional, those things are going on with the kid. You need that parent involved at home so that you don't have to try to figure everything out when they get to the school, right? Teachers already got a lot on them. Principals got a lot on them. If you do help them do it at home, then those kids, hopefully will be in a better place when they get there.
It's so true. And you're making me think of Sasan Jabbar on our last panel who said, we're so used to being the gatekeepers of all this stuff as staff. We got to get out of the way. We've got to become facilitators to do exactly what you're describing. So when students and parents come in, they're already engaged and they understand the process and they can participate. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for kicking this off. Starr and Andrea, what are your thoughts on this?
Um, Ryan and Walter, thank you both for getting this started. And Ryan, you hit the nail on the head so many times. I
Yeah.
think Starr can agree with me as you were talking about, the parent involvement and the importance of things starting at home. And in the work that I do as an educator and then also as a restorative justice and education practitioner, that is such an important part. But not only do we need to have the parental involvement and the connection between school and home, but we also have to make sure that we're providing the tools. So, Ryan, you said, what does that look like? And I loved when you talked about explaining what an IEP is, what a 504 plan is, what IDEA even means, right? And in RJE, one thing that we believe is that language matters. That's so important. And so we've got to get on the same page. And it's not that our parents don't want to be involved. It's not that they don't want to have anything to do with their child's educational journey. A lot of the time, it's just that they're not equipped and they wonder how exactly can I be helping my student? And so it's more than just those encounters that we have in parent-teacher conferences and more than inviting them to events at school. And in advocacy work that I do with parents, I often get from them, thank you so much for giving me this information. I had no idea, or thank you for taking this huge brochure that the school has sent home and breaking it down to make sense in language that not only they understand, but also in language that their children then understand so that they can be part of the process. I also love that you said no matter what the home looks like, no matter if they are, below the poverty level, or no matter if it's a one-parent home or grandparents raising the children in the home. I think that we're able to work with that. And we have to understand that power dynamic of power with one another. And as long as we're involving each other in the process, then we're able to collaborate in a way that allows our students to have those high expectations, right, that are set, and then also allows them to be able to meet those high expectations because they have high support to go along with it, starting at home and then also transferring into the school space. And then, so I think though, too, we have to be realistic when we think about that. I was having a conversation today, as a matter of fact, about systems change. And while it is a wonderful idea to have a complete overhaul and change the system, the time that that takes is not realistic. So how can we take the systems that are already in place and make them restorative in ways that allow us to do things like what you're talking about, and allow us to shift that power dynamic so that it's more of a collaborative effort rather than us against them, or the traditional way of seeing things happening between school and home. So I agree that it starts there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I was thinking while the two of you were talking, and Aundrea, you totally set me up for where I was coming, because like thinking about the advocacy work that I do as well, so much of that is the language and the miscommunication about what we mean and how we mean it, and helping parents to navigate that, especially when their children have unique needs that might be different than the usual. And the school doesn't actually know how to handle the issue, and the parent doesn't know how to advocate because they're trying to figure stuff out too. And then to that second point you just made, Aundrea, about being realistic about what it looks like in the school day, and I wanted to kind of move it into that conversation. I
Yeah.
think that everyone comes into school with a really unique situation, and even I would say that even the most together kids have stuff going on that we might not be aware of. And I say that as a person myself who was a type A student who did very well at school, but school was my salvation. my home life was very complicated. And you wouldn't have known that if you didn't know me, because it looked like I come from an affluent family in a nice area, but there was a lot of instability. My dad's a recovering addict. Like, dealing with that growing up at that time was not, people did not talk about it back then. So that was like the additional challenge of like, yeah, my home life is crazy. My dad is in and out of rehab. How do I deal with that scenario and still keep a straight face where I'm trying to do things? And I carry that level of empathy with me into the classroom for all the humans that I'm dealing with, right? Like, whether it's my colleagues having a rough time at home, or the kiddos who are coming in with the burdens of taking care of younger siblings or working jobs. As a high school teacher, when you're working around the students, it's very easy to jump to conclusions about how they may or may not be prepared to be there. But we have to take a more inclusive view that says every child belongs here, regardless of what they're leaving at the door. And how can we make this space a safe one, and one that is encouraging learning and success for every single child in that space. So, thinking about all the things that both Ryan and Andrea said already, like thinking about what we do have in our control, which, this much, as opposed to this much holistically for what is in our control. What kind of levels of empathy and love and joy are we bringing to the spaces that we're in, so that these kiddos who might not experience that at home get it when they come to school, so that school can be a sanctuary for them, as well as, a safe place to make mistakes and learn.
I love that. So, big surprise, we're all of one mind here. We all know, we've been in the trenches. We know what's at stake and we know what's important. So what are the impediments to this? Eh, for lack of a better cliche, it's not rocket science. We're people. We need love, we need healing. We need people that empathize and help us on our way. What is it structurally and institutionally that, as we sit here tonight and say these things so clearly, keep us from making major changes that need to be made in public education?
Walter, one of the things that I hear most often from teachers when I'm working with implementing the work of RJE in schools is
Yes.
time, and also other things that they have to adhere to. And I often get the question, I have to do all of these other things. I have all of these other, I guess, mandates and rules that I have to go by. How do I find the time to implement circles, or implement, a take what you need moment or take what you need board for my students? And um, I think also that it's been so ingrained to follow the system that to do something different, to go against it, feels hard. And I will say that coming from a space of being a classroom teacher before I was doing this work, I
Yes.
can totally be there in that space with those teachers and understand where they're coming from. So it's a complete mindset shift, truly, that takes place when you go from the space of I've got to go down the list and check off the boxes, to let me shift over to this side and make sure that my students have what they need. And once you do that, and I think Starr and Ryan can probably empathize here, is that once you take that time to just make sure that your students are feeling safe, that they're feeling respected, that they're feeling dignified, and that there's a mutual concern in the space with them, then all of those boxes that are so, in dire need of being checked off, they kind of take care of themselves. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and so I think, I don't know that there is an impediment, so to speak. I think that it just might be kind of nervousness, anxiousness, and maybe a little bit of fear
Thank you.
for going against the grain.
There you go. Everyone's nodding their heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ryan, tell us more.
You got to that last one where I was getting ready to go with.
Yep.
System is the system is the impediment to the system, right? You know, the superintendent has a certain set of goals and expectations they have to meet to satisfy what the school board needs and what the, you know, and the school board has some certain things that need to meet for accreditation purposes. That trickles down to the superintendent, which then trickles down to their cabinet, which then trickles down to the principals, but then trickles down to the teachers. And now you got teachers in there so worried about passing the SOL scores that they can't take the time to empathize and figure out who their students are in the classroom so that they are able to create those conditions, right? And then we have stuff where it comes, you know, we have certain places where now they try to passing the SOLs or whatever those end of year standardized tests are called where you're from. Some places have gotten to the point where they need them passed so much they're incentivizing teachers with money um, for them to pass the test, which I'm not against. I don't want to count no teacher's pocket. I think teachers supposed to make as much money as they possibly can, but to make it on the backs of the kids needing to pass this test is what then creates this culture of what Aundrea mentioned, fear at the end, where you're always in this space of, I have to perform at this level. I have to perform at this level. Even if you're not in one of those grades that's taking a standardized test, if you're in kindergarten through second grade, you're hoping that you're in such a heightened state of needing to perform, because when they get to third grade, if they don't pass that test in third grade, they're probably going to blame second, first, and kindergarten for them not being prepared enough to get there. When in reality, the reason they're not prepared is because nobody's taking the time to figure out who the heck the kid is. Who is the kid? What do you enjoy? How do I bring learning to life for you? And that's why teachers get into the game. Teachers get into the game to do things, to bring things to life. And now teachers are not in a position to where they're able to use those creative sides of who they are to bring things to life for children, because they're in such fear of, if I do anything outside of the box, if I do anything outside of the norm, if I don't do the my time, your time, us time, if I don't follow all of those things to the T, if I don't have my learning objective posted on the board when the principal walks in for my observation,
Yeah.
then I'm going to get this bad report, and it doesn't leave them the opportunity to create those conditions for kids. So I think the system is the impediment to the system.
Wow. Stop.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that they're like, having worn both a leader hat and a classroom teacher hat, like in the classroom, I found ways, like I used to joke that my superpower was finding loopholes and exploiting it in the classroom. Like, what is best for kids? Don't ask for permission, give forgiveness after. And I would say that most of the stuff, like when I was trying to figure out my systems that were different, that didn't meet those criteria you were just talking about, Ryan, like I had good results, and so they left me alone. But it took me being brave enough to try something that was so far outside of what other folks were doing to get to those results that I saw that you put in the chat, Andrea, it takes one. It takes a moment of your own bravery to get outside of the way to try to put the needs of your kiddos first. And then when it comes back to you later and they ask you, why did you make this decision? Why did you go against this or that? All you have to say is have the data that backs up the decision that you made. And if you get to know your kids right away and you don't lean in on the first day with every rule and regulation, but you spend some time actually knowing the kids who are sitting in front of you, and then ease into the content and ease into all of that other space where you're creating the shared space together where the kids want to be and learn, and the tests and all those other things are secondary to the learning that happens on the everyday. And then from the leadership perspective, when I was in my curriculum role, my curriculum leadership role, like my job was to protect the teachers from that trickle down effect. How much could I catch before it wound up on them? How much was appropriate for them to see? And what information do I want to withhold so it doesn't become problematic for them? I could give you an example. We had started moving to like data collection in that space. And a lot of my teachers had been in that district their entire careers, but no one had ever offered them professional learning on the specific things they were asking for. I found it very hypocritical to expect people to do things that they had never learned to do and then penalize them for it after the fact. So I actually started going into classrooms and helped them collect data, then had a conversation with them about it. And then when it came time to fill out spreadsheets, I sat down with them and tried to fill in as much as I could for them so that there wasn't this burden of more time of filling out paperwork when I had the answers already. And I think a lot of really good leaders need to do what they can to protect teachers so that they could do the important work of knowing the kids and then getting the kids exactly what they need. Because as a leader, you're removed from the kids. And the ones you may know are the ones who might have more challenges. And if we're handling it in the traditional way, those kids are spending way too much time outside of the learning environment. So how do we keep them in the classroom, in their seats, supporting the teachers so that we have this ecosystem where kids are excited to be in that space, don't want to make the disruptions that are being created, and how can we get curious about why those disruptions are happening and how we could correct them without sending them out of the room immediately when they act out, because there's always a reason, right?
Starr, you are speaking my language. RJE speaks so heavily to keeping our students in the learning environment as often as possible. And also, in the leadership role, having also been there as well. You speak of, being able to support the teachers so they're not feeling like they have to take more time to do things. And that also speaks to the power dynamic of together with one another and being in collaboration with one another. And so while you're there helping out the teachers, you're also then able to build small relationships with the students that you encounter when you're there. So you're not a complete stranger to them. So you're not fully disconnected, right? And they also see that spirit of collaboration. And when we get past that moment, like you said, and just have the guts to go and do what we need to do to get to know our students, colleagues, leaders alike, that trickle down effect then turns into the ripple effect that we talk about in RJE, where the good then ripples out. And so people see that data and those good results that you have, and they start to ask questions. What are you doing? Why is this working so well? I need to know so that I can have this happening as well in the space that I'm in. And so that's when we begin to share different things. And I remember once when I was in a leadership role, we made a list of times that we don't want to send the student out of the classroom, and then times when we absolutely have to, because those moments come up. But in doing that, there's strategies that teachers can use so that students are able to stay in the learning environment rather than being removed. We want them there as much as we possibly can. And I think that it all comes back to just showing them that we're human. Walter, you said it. We're all human. We all desire care and healing and relationship. And I think as much as we can demonstrate that, the better off we are.
And I think, going back to Ryan's very incisive statement, fear as an impediment, and the system being the impediment of the system, you're all alluding to leaders. How can leaders assuage the fear and the power dynamic and the sense that we're locked into things that we have no control over? That is where this begins. I mean, if your principal or your superintendent starts to send signals that it's okay to take risks and try new things and break through the way things have always been done, and there'll be a safe place to say I failed and then I'm going to try it again and I'll learn from what didn't work. Um, what does that look like for leaders in your minds? How does a leader start to make that turn from the trickle down? I love that, Aundrea, to the ripple.
I want to say something, but I want to defer to Ryan because you haven't had enough.
No, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of people say things, but their behaviors don't match what they say. So
Talk about that, please.
I I don't think you say anything at first. I think you start by doing. You show up. If you're a superintendent, if you're a central office person, be in classrooms and not to catch people doing things wrong, but to catch them doing things right. Celebrate the things you see. Be very vocal about these things. I heard Joe Sanfilippo once say that when he talks, like he spreads good by gossiping on positive ways about positive things that he heard from other people to get teachers talking about these positive things and get them into each other's classrooms. And it really resonated with me because I could say to teachers who have been in a system for a long time that I want to do things differently, right? I mean, we can all say it. And as, you know, as a new person walking in, they all thought I was crazy when I first got there because I was wearing my teacher hat first, the empathy on my sleeve, I wanted to help them. But their last three leaders did not have that style of leadership. So they just thought I was going to be a person who was going to be gone in a year. How much of this investment do I need to make? And I feel like it's really important that our words and our behaviors match and that we're consistent on both of those fronts because teachers are just not going to believe that there's real change unless real change is happening while we're talking about it.
Boy, real talk.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better. That's exactly where I was going with it, is that, less talking, more doing and showing. This is what you actually believe in, what you actually mean. You mean what you say, that you're actually going to support teachers when those times come, that you actually show up and you support, that you know, are really taking the opportunity to listen more, just listen more than you talk, right? And you got to be willing to take that time. Um, and one of my most vivid memories as a young person, my dad was a principal for maybe about 10 years. And the school that he became principal of, elementary school, had some challenges with attendance. And maybe within about the first year and a half, 2 years, their attendance rates had increased. And um, I didn't at the time understand, attendance rates and all of those kind of things. But, once I became a principal, I asked him, how did you do it? And he said, you remember all those times we were going places that you didn't know why we were over there? And I would go up to that door and come back, and I would have 2 or 3 kids with me, and we would drop them off at school, right? He didn't tell parents that he needed their kids at school. If the kid wasn't at school, he went to the house, knocked on the door, made them put their clothes on, get their backpack, put them in the car, and took them to school, right?
Powerful.
Those they just do it. And any educator who I can think of, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Nichols, who wanted to ensure that students had the opportunity to understand who they were from their history and understand where they came from. He didn't tell people that he needed an African American culture class at Patrick Henry High School. He gave up his lunch break and invited kids into his classroom to eat lunch with him while he taught them African American culture. Then eventually the principal hears about it and asks him, "What are you doing?" Principal comes into the classroom. Then the superintendent comes into the classroom. Now all of a sudden, Mr. Nichols retired 4 or 5 years ago from teaching for 39 years. The African American culture class is still going at Patrick Henry High School. Not because he told somebody first what he was going to do. To your point, Starr, he just went and did what needed to be done and was willing to take whatever blowback may come, right? To create that atmosphere and those conditions, and the understanding that he could use something like African American culture to unite the school, right? It weren't just Black kids who were taking an African American culture class, right? He used those things to unite the school. So I think, leaders have to be willing to actually do something. Right? Just so many leaders now who are sitting behind the desk, sitting behind the computer, aren't coming out of the ivory tower to come down to where the school is. Even if you're in the school, I can't tell you how many principals I know who never, popped the door open and poked their head out from their office, right? You have to be willing to remember who you are, roll your sleeves up. Last thing I say on this is a gentleman by the name of Mr. Peter Lewis runs a camp here in Roanoke, Virginia called Apple Ridge Farm.
Yeah.
And the biggest lesson he taught me about rolling up your sleeves and doing things that you're asking other people to do in the early stages of that camp. They were building a basketball court there up on the camp, and he needed some help from some of the campers. So we walk up this big old hill, and he has these huge mounds of gravel and shovels inside of it. And he makes us peek over into these holes that I don't know how deep they are. At that point in time, I felt like if I jumped in one, I keep going forever, right? And he says, I need for y'all to help me shovel this gravel into the hole. I look over about 5 minutes in, and there goes Mr. Lewis at 65, 66 years old, sleeves rolled up with a shovel, shoveling the gravel into the hole with us.
Yeah.
At that point in time, as a kid, there was no way for me to logically make an excuse to not want to perform well for this man.
Yes.
I wanted to do it at that point in time, not because of anything he had ever told me. He showed me what it meant to actually serve and be in a position where you're doing the things that you're asking other people to do. And it's probably one of the most powerful lessons I've ever had in my life.
And I love
Ryan.
oh, go ahead. No.
No, Walter, you go ahead. I'm
No, no,
sorry.
please,
I didn't
Aundrea,
interrupt you.
please.
I was just gonna say, Walter, that is amazing.
Yes.
It reminds me a lot of my dad, like just get out there and do it. Stop talking about it, and do it. And Starr, my favorite quote is just do it now and ask for forgiveness later. That was my thing as a classroom teacher.
Yep.
Was my thing as an administrator, and
Yep.
now as a professor, it's the same. Like
Yeah.
you've got to get out there and do it, and you can't have expectations of people that you are afraid to do yourself. Like if you can't get in there and get your hands dirty with them, like you were speaking of this man that you were working with at the camp, Ryan, like you got to be able to get in there and get in the trenches, especially as educators. And so I think for leaders, it means spending most of your time in the school buildings and the least amount of your time in the office, and just being there. I mean, I still have teachers that will call me now to ask for different pieces of advice because they remember that I showed up. I mean, and that's the thing, you have to be there for them. And that goes back to the idea of just being human and letting them know that we're all in this together and there is no hierarchy, even though our positions like to label us as such. We are all on the same playing field and we all have the same ultimate goal, which is the overall success for our students, for the school community, for the community at large. Like we want to be producing successful students that grow up to be successful middle school students and successful high school students that are successful graduates and career driven people, whether they go to college or choose a CTE path. Like we want to make sure that we are preparing generations for what's to come. And that means that we've got to show up and we've got to show up authentically. So yeah, I mean, it's just, and it sounds simple, like to us and to me for it coming out of my mouth, right? Sounds simple, but I do want to recognize and name that to make the shift, to actually do it is not easy. And so the encouragement is a necessary thing. That's part of the justice piece of it all, is that everyone at every stage has to feel like they bring something to the table and know that what they bring to the table is of value for the task that's in front of them.
So let's cut through this. Everything you've said, I've been taking notes madly. This is powerful, powerful stuff. And you'll need a minute to think about this. This is I haven't been throwing snowballs anyway, but this is going to be even a little more. Take a minute to think. If you could wave a wand right now, considering all the things we've been talking about here, and they're all critically important, but if you could wave a wand and make one thing immediately better, make one thing either go away or enhanced or the priority or the unified goal that everyone agrees as we're all going to work and make this happen. Understanding there's all these other pieces that still need to be addressed. But if there was one thing that in your mind, if you could make this one thing, a switch flip, and all of a sudden this one thing is moving in the right direction, what would that be?
I say we get rid of standardized testing and we bring the humanity back to the classroom. Um, if we don't have all of those high stakes situations and all the pressure to perform on them and all the inequities that come with that scenario, we could actually focus on the kids in class without that pressure. Um, and just that's just one thing. And obviously, like
Yeah.
Andrea and Ryan were saying, like it's not easy to do all those other things, but I think that if we took that high stakes accountability off the table,
Mhm.
you might find folks are more readily willing to be accountable in different ways. And I've found that qualitative sort of qualitative data that comes from more project-based experiential learning experiences that kids can invest in is a far more authentic way to get kids to invest in themselves and in their own learning.
Yep.
And if they didn't have, like, if we had, let's say, universal portfolio assessment as a means to demonstrate what kids know and can do over the
Mhm.
course of a year, and we're not testing them every single month at benchmarks and all the things, but we're having conferences with them and we're teaching them to be advocates for themselves and having these conversations and feedback periods throughout the school year so that they have this body of work at the end of the year that demonstrates the learning that they've done. I think that that would be a really solid movement for fixing things, at least a good first step.
Thank you.
Yes, standardized testing is always is always a good one, right? If I can get rid of standardized testing, I will too. Uh, where my mind eventually got to though was if I could wave a magic wand and one
Yes.
thing was different, it would be that every child had at least one adult in their life who was willing, who had the knowledge and was willing to advocate on their behalf. And the reason for that, I think, because adults, the adults in the equation touch so many things. The adults in the adults are the ones who are electing. If you're in a place where a school board is elected, they're the
Right.
ones electing the school board members. If you don't like the particular superintendent who's in charge, what's more powerful than 200 people showing up to the school board meeting to advocate for a particular change within policies and procedures of a school system, right? The adults are the ones electing the state officials. The adults are the ones electing the national politicians that then affect what's going on in our schools. And then the adults are the ones who, um, if done in a healthy way, have the ability to, um, before a kid even arrives in the classroom, have positioned the kid to want to be and be prepared to be in that environment to even take advantage of if these conditions are created in this way, right? And so to me, it would be every child had at least one adult in their life who was willing to go to bat for them and advocate for them on their behalf.
Thank
I
you.
love that.
Yeah.
Both of you, like testing is a hard thing. I think that so many students would benefit from qualitative testing and the ability to just be able to show what they know rather than the traditional standardized tests. And Ryan, Every child needs a champion. I think it's Rita Pearson who says that, and I love her. And so I agree with that wholeheartedly. And for me, I think if we could have a 4-day school week, not so that our time is cut short, or so that we're in school for 4 days and off for the fifth. But I'm thinking more so we're in school doing academics for those 4 days, and then the fifth day becomes more of like a community day, a social emotional learning day, where everything that we're doing in school that day is not academic, but instead where it's life skills, it's relationship building, it's bringing in families, and that can vary like for day of the week or just to fit whatever the school system needs. But I think if we start with those types of small things, where again, both of you said we pull off some of this focus from the academics and we take it back to the human level, and recognize that we're all in this together. And in the end of it all, no matter the age, we all are just human in that desire to be together with one another. I think that that would make a huge, huge difference in all of the standardized test data, all of these things, the need for each child to have one adult that would advocate for them. That stuff happens automatically, but we've got to begin with putting the tools out there and making them available to everyone. So yeah, I mean, gosh, can we do that? Waving the magic wand over here.
Well, we don't have the wand, but we have the vision. And yes, we can do these things.
I think so. I mean, I think principals, I know at least in New York City public schools, they had the ability to request changes like that. And one of the schools I worked in, we actually had a shortened day on Wednesdays, where kids got early release, and we called it field, like it was their field learning time. So they were expected to go out and do work around a project or service learning. And teachers had those afternoons for professional learning, for different things that were going on. And I, I mean, if you could get release time for service learning, why couldn't you get release time for something like, community building, which is so important. I love what both of you said, an advocate, like
Yes.
definitely every kid needs an advocate. So I'm
Yep.
I'm behind all these things if we're waving wands, for sure.
So we have these things in place, and kids are coming to school. What does the day and the learning look like for them when we've recentered the power, we've built the learning around them, and we've created a culture where we're advocating for them in everything we do?
If I could speak first here,
Please.
I think it looks like students showing up, being ready to learn and willing to learn. It looks like students being accountable for themselves and for each other. So they're not only, looking out for themselves, but they have each other's back. And so if they see, a moment of conflict with a friend or, with another teacher and a friend, they're quick to step in, like, how can I help here? Or if they see a moment of need amongst their peers, they're ready to step in and help. I see it being a day that is just productive, overall successful. Um, and I'm not going to say that there's the absence of any conflict, because we know inevitably, like, it's still going to happen. But I think the response to it is a lot better, and that there are more tools and people in place to support students when they are put first, when they are in charge of their learning and accountable to holding up those relationships and those high expectations with high support that we talk about so often in RJE. And I'm grateful to see those kinds of things happen in places and spaces where I'm working, where the schools are implementing these practices, and it is a wonderful thing, especially at the beginning of the mindset shift, where you start to see students who have typically been students that have trouble, that don't make it through the day, being the ones to hold other students accountable or themselves accountable. Like if conflict arises, for example, you might have that same student say, oh, hey, it's not worth it. Like, let's shift and move in a different direction, or, find an alternate activity to do. And so it's just amazing to see. So I think it's a very rewarding day.
Thank you.
No, that sounds like an awesome and great day. If for me, it would be um, walking into a school and everything looks different from everything you may have walked by the class before the last class you just visited, right? Because I think these conditions and these cultures that we're talking about would position kids to be able to be, as Aundrea keeps talking about, their authentic selves. It would allow for teachers to be their authentic selves. It would allow for the leaders in the buildings to be their authentic selves. And anytime anybody's their authentic self, it's going to look different from person to person, right?
Yeah.
And so, being able to walk in, I remember visiting a school in South Carolina where I went into one class and, the students were in there doing some self-guided learning. They were in the fourth grade. They were sitting, laying on bean bags, and, they had their iPads and they were pacing themselves through the course material. And another group was up there with the teacher, getting some one-to-one help. And I went to a classroom next door, and they were sitting in the classroom almost college lecture style, right? And they seemed to be just as engaged and having just as much fun. And in that school, they had paired the kids based on personality, right? And how they may feed off of each other and different things of that nature. And it was just a great thing to see, right? Kids just, no matter what the room was and what the teacher style was and what the students' learning style was, they were in there just having a good time. And I got to see, to Aundrea's point, some conflict, right? Not everything is going to be roses all the time, but that we have people in place that, understand and are willing to take some time to try to figure out what's going on at the heart of something. So, in a perfect world, that would be the place I would love to walk into, where everything just looks different than everything else I saw before I got to this place in the school.
And what a great way to prepare kids for their adult life in the workplace and in society and being a participating citizen.
Yeah.
A great vision. Thank you, Ryan.
I think to that end too, you walk into a building and instead of walking into a space where you're walking through, metal detectors and security when you first walk in, you're walking into a welcoming space where even the very first person you encounter in that space is happy to have you there. And that's what kids meet when they get off the bus. You have somebody welcoming them at the door, inviting them to have a good day. Like I feel like sometimes, especially at the high school level, kiddos don't always have that when they get out of the house. So like to welcome them as a new fresh day every day, regardless of where we ended yesterday, today's going to be a good day. And that's the message that they get when they first come in. They have autonomy over what they're learning and when they're learning it. So it's not like this industrial error model of bells ringing and people like Pavlov going from one room to the next room to the next room. And it's really more of a today I want to spend 90 minutes working on this assignment, and the school itself is interdisciplinary. So
Right.
things aren't separated. It's like learning is the way it is in life, where I'm learning to do this thing, and the skills I need to build and the content I need to know are coming from 3 different content areas. So my teachers have the flexibility and autonomy to work together as well, so that if I'm helping to lead a project or an experience with them, we are working in concert together to give the kids the best success they could have in that space. Kids are involved in leadership too, so they're making decisions about their learning. Their voices are accounted for in the conversations, not just as a principal's advisory council, but maybe they even have a seat on the board and are a part of a voting seat, not just a token seat for them. And where what they say matters and actually gets into the school day. They don't have to wait to have fun learning and celebrating experiences. Those things happen as they're appropriate. So if we're doing something and somebody finishes something, we take a moment, we stop, we celebrate, we share, and then we bounce off to whatever the next thing is. I feel like in a lot of ways, if kids could be a part of the planning of what's going on, they'll be more likely to be invested and want to be contributors to that, not just for themselves, but for the legacy they're leaving for the kids that are coming after them. So I just see a place where kids are truly in control, and not just because a few individual teachers give up their control and their space, but because that is what it is by design. This is
Right.
their learning experience, and we are there to serve them. Um, I think that would be awesome.
So if I could add to that, sorry,
Yes.
look up Village Tech Schools. It's in Texas. I used to teach there in their very like first couple of years, and we
Mhm.
were like on a property and everything was outside. We were in portable classrooms, but they now have moved their campus and it is that what you were just talking about. Go look it up. They have elementary and now they have a whole secondary school. And it's beautiful, 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 beautiful. So yeah, oh, I
So
love
it
it.
can be done, is what you're saying. It can be done.
Yes,
It is
it
being
can be
done.
done. It took years, but it was done, is going.
I love that.
Well, bam, that just happened. This has been a fast-paced hour. It's already over. We barely scratched the surface. I would love to continue this conversation with the 3 of you in the future. But for tonight, I want to wrap up this recording so we can get it out tomorrow and move the conversation further. You did not disappoint. Aundrea and Ryan and Starr, thank you so much for everything you brought to this hour. We've learned a lot, and you give me hope. This is possible. We can do this. And it's because of dedicated educators like you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Walter.
Thanks, Walter.
Thank you.